When we talk about disaster risk, we know that there's three main components that usually people talk about. So we have the hazard itself. So that's like floods, earthquakes, typhoons, storm surge. And then we have the exposure. So this is where like the type of assets that we're looking at. Are we looking at residential buildings, agricultural land, commercial buildings? So this is more building footprints. And then we also have the vulnerability, which is like the hard part because that can range from a lot of different factors. So you have the physical vulnerability, social vulnerability, economic vulnerability. We try to assess the impact of flood risk on households in the province of Leyte at the municipal scale. So we focused on one LGU, the municipal of Carigara, and we tried to use flood risk mapping to see how damage changes over time under climate change.
Sa tuwing nagbabasa kayo ng mga research papers, nagtataka din ba kayo kung paano ito naisipan gawin ng mga researchers? Paano nila na-transform ang idea nila para maging isang actual na research project? Saan sila kumuha ng funding para magawa to? Paano nila nalaman na ang results nila ay pwede na nilang ipasa for publication? Dito, sa Behind the Science podcast, ay kakausapin natin ang ating mga Pinoy scientists para ibahagi hindi lang ang mga resulta ng kanilang pag-aaral, kundi pati na rin ang mga behind the scenes or behind the science stories nito. Simula sa kung paano nila ito naisipan gawin hanggang sa na-publish na nila ito. So this podcast is in partnership with the UP Resilience Institute, the Philippine Agricultural Scientist, the Philippine Journal of Fisheries, and SciEnggJ. So ang UP Resilience Institute ay long-time partners na namin dito sa podcast. Nung nagsisimula pa lang kami, nandyan na sila para tumulong sa amin. At para lang sa kaalaman ng lahat, ako ngayon ay isang UPRI Research Fellow. The Philippine Agricultural Scientist is the first international journal in the Philippines and Southeast Asia in the field of agriculture. It is published by the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, College of Agriculture and Food Science. It publishes articles in the fields of tropical agricultural science and related areas including environmental science, food science, engineering, biotechnology, economics, rural sociology, development communication, agroforestry and silviculture, and marine and fishery science. The Philippine Journal of Fisheries is the official publication of the Department of Agriculture, National Fisheries Research and Development Institute. It covers all aspects of fisheries, both in basic and applied sciences, as well as related fields of studies such as capture fisheries, aquaculture, post-harvest technology, marketing and industry, ecology, oceanography, conservation, biotechnology, food safety, socio-economics, and systematics in freshwater, estuarine, marine, and other identifiable water habitats. SciEnggJ, formerly known as the Philippine Science Letters, is the official journal of the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering. It covers studies in the natural, physical, mathematical, computational, and social sciences, including those related to agriculture, health, engineering, environment, education, and technology. So kung may paper kayong gustong i-publish at pasok ito sa scope ng mga journals na ito, please consider submitting to one of them. At syempre, importante, take note na hindi kayo pwede mag-submit ng sabay-sabay sa 3 journals na ito. Kasi bawal yon. Dapat sa isang journal muna kayo mag-submit. At ang mga journals na to ay index na rin sa Web of Science, Scopus, ASEAN Citation Index, and SciEnggJ Journal Ranking. Kaya masisiguro nyo dito ang mataas na standard at mabusisi na review process para masiguro ang high-quality papers na pinapublish. So if you're interested in publishing your research in one of these journals, check nyo ang guidelines at ang links ay nasa description. Magandang araw mga kapwa-scientista at welcome sa isa na namang episode ng Behind the Science podcast. Our guest is a civil engineer and PhD student at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, where he is conducting research on socio-technical decision-making in the context of resilient housing and settlements. He earned both his master's in humanitarian engineering and his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Sydney in Australia. His previous research includes flood risk modeling under climate change scenarios, vulnerability assessments of residential structures in Leyte, and post-conflict housing pathways in Marawi. So without further ado, let's all welcome Mr. Engineer Isaac Besarra.
Engineer Isaac. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me today, and good morning or good afternoon to anyone listening to the podcast.
Ayun. So, bago pala tayo magsimula, kung nag-enjoy kayo sa podcast na ito at gusto nyo ang ginagawa namin dito, paki-like naman ang episode na ito at mag-subscribe na rin kayo sa mga social media platforms namin. So, ang Behind the Science podcast ay makikita nyo sa Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Facebook. So, ayun. Bali, ang topic natin for today, syempre yung pagbaha sa Pilipinas. Problema talaga natin yun palagi at lalong lumalala yung baha. And considering yung climate change, mas expect pa natin yung malalang bagyo and baha. So ngayon, ang pag-uusapan natin ay magkano ang magiging damage ng mga pagbaha na ito sa future climate change scenario.
Yes.
And bago natin yung pag-usapan, the usual, mas kilalanin muna natin ang ating guest. Ayun. So kanina pala napagkwento namin ni Isaac kasi sa Australia siya nag-bachelor's and master's. Ayun. So Isaac, pwede mo bang makwento sa amin? Sa Australia ka na ba pinanganak or nag-migrate lang kayo dyan nung nagsimula ka ng mag-college? Or...
No, so I was actually born and raised in Sydney. So my parents moved well before I was born. So I spent most of my time there, and I did my bachelor's and master's there. And then I only recently moved to the Netherlands October last year to start my PhD. So I've been here in the Netherlands for less than a year now. So, and then, yeah.
And then, yung pag-pursue mo nung civil engineering, bakit yun ang pinili mong kurso?
Well, it's a tricky question because I feel like for Filipinos, right, there's only a few options that you get stereotyped to be: nursing or working in the engineers or accounting or finance. But I think for me, growing up, I always was inclined with more of the STEM field, math, science. I didn't really like English or writing or reading. So being in primary school, I was leaning towards the maths and science side. And then I think it's when you start picking your courses for university, you're like, okay, I'm going to start focusing on some of the skills that, I want to be in the future. So I was actually tossing up between, accounting and becoming an engineer, at least by high school. But then I figured out I didn't like dealing with money and finance and numbers. And I like more of the problem solving and the critical thinking. So that kind of pushed me into the direction of civil engineering, because it has that complex. So then that's how I got into the engineering area.
Wait. Sabi mo kanina, ayaw mo sa accounting dahil madaming math. Pero di ba yung engineering, madami ding math yun?
No, I feel like accounting math is more like percentages, doing interest rates. To me, that's like very boring maths. I like the calculus, the more, that's I find more interesting than just spreadsheets. But then later on, towards the end of your degree at civil engineering, you find out it's going to be Excel spreadsheets anyways.
Parang lahat ng trabaho after graduation ng college, kailangan mo pa rin nung Excel.
It's all a lie.
Yung specialization mo, simula nung undergraduate hanggang ngayon, humanitarian engineering.
Yes.
Ano ang ibig sabihin ng humanitarian engineering?
Okay, so humanitarian engineering, it's a bit tough because I feel like it's starting to emerge now as courses that you can take with engineering. So in high school, when I said I wanted to do, the more technical side, the more problem solving, I was also wanted to do more of the social side as well, because actually the reason why I also picked humanitarian engineering as a course was when I was in high school. I think, what year was it? 2016. I was in grade 11. I went to Bohol to do more of like a missionary trip with the church and school. And then we went to the Philippines and we worked with some schools there, and I was like, oh, okay, I think I want to work in more of this area, more of the social sides, and work with these type of communities. And then so when I came back, I was conflicted. I was like, should I work more on the the social side, or should I continue more with the technical engineering side? And then that was playing in my head, I guess, for the next few months. And then I think, what was it? Like a few months after that, we had a group come to our school to showcase, these are the pathways or the courses that you can take at the university, and they were called Engineers Without Borders. You might heard of Doctors Without Borders, so this is like more the engineer version. And what they do is that they classify or they spread the term humanitarian engineering. And basically what they do is they do a lot of international development work. So working on communities, that are, more developing, and they have more a human-centered approach to engineering. And that's when I first learned about what that actually was. So I guess my one sentence definition of humanitarian engineering is that it's the intersection between social science and the application of technical engineering principles. So it's a good balance. And they're actually starting to do more courses in that field. So in 2017, they started the humanitarian engineering major at the University of Sydney, where you can start to specialize. Here in my university, at the University of Twente, we're starting a Master's of Humanitarian Engineering starting in September. So it's a big growing course, and but it's also exciting as well.
So, 'di ba, pagka-graduate mo ng college, bakit mo pa naisipan na mag-graduate school pa na ituloy-tuloy na masters and then PhD? What made you decide to pursue graduate school?
Another tough question. Probably I'm just avoiding the the work culture. No, I think for me, because I think after finishing my major in humanitarian engineering after my bachelor's, I was really focused on pursuing this career path, and it's very hard to find an industry job, at least in the humanitarian sector. Like you have to make connections with people, and you really have to lean into research. So actually, it's more of timing. I feel like timing played a big role, because right after I finished my bachelor's, my supervisor, who I did my thesis with, he messaged me. He was like, there's a project that we have in the Philippines next year. If you want to do your master's, you should apply for it. And that happened like 6 months after I graduated. So I was like, okay, I'll just try. So then I applied for it and then got it. So I did my master's for 2 years. And then after that happened, I was applying for jobs again. After my master's, I was looking for jobs, and I was freaking out. I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And then I came up on a post on LinkedIn, and it was like PhD position on the title of my research. I was like, oh, this could be interesting. So I applied for that.
Sa LinkedIn mo nakita yung opportunity?
Yeah, LinkedIn.
Okay.
At least for the PhD, it was on LinkedIn. I saw it and then I applied for it, and then so I've just been back-to-back research, and there's its pros and cons. Its cons is that most people in postgrad, they usually have the experience working in industry. But then there's also its pros of studying back to back, is that you're on that momentum. I feel like if you have that research, drive, and you can keep going, then I really feel like it's beneficial in the long run.
Ay, kanina pala nabanggit mo na nung 2016 pumunta ka ng Bohol. And then tinignan ko kasi yung yung mga past research mo. So during nung college ka, ang naging research area mo is sa Marawi, tapos nung nagmasters ka na sa Leyte. Paano ka naman napunta sa ganong research area, yung sa Marawi and sa Leyte?
So the Marawi study was for my bachelor's thesis. So I did that thesis 2020. What year was it? Sorry. 2021. I think it was in the middle of COVID sometime. So it was more of a retrospective, more interview, trying to see how people perceive their housing satisfaction after they relocated to a housing settlement. So it wasn't like we did field work there. So
ito ba yung pagkatapos na nung giyera dun sa Marawi, or?
Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
Yung context ba nung study mo na yun after nung giyera, yung war dun sa Marawi, or yung COVID na pandemic?
After the war in 2017. But then there was also aspects of COVID that was happening at the same time, because we couldn't go there because of the situation there, and also because of COVID. So we worked with Mindanao State University, and we had enumerators there to conduct more of the field work. So that was the
Okay.
bachelor thesis for that. And then the fieldwork in Leyte was for my master. So that was 2022. So I went back there in 2022. Yeah.
Ang galing lang na na kahit nasa Australia ka and Netherlands, yung study area mo pa rin ay nasa Philippines.
Philippines, yeah, I know. It's something like I really enjoy it. Going back to the culture as well. I think that's one of the main reasons why I'm working in the Philippines, because it's also an opportunity of me to learn back and reflect on the Philippine culture. So that's why I love working there.
Tapos yung work mo dito sa Philippines, like after graduating college sa UP Resilience Institute, tama ba?
We worked alongside them. So the Leyte project for my master's was a joint project. So it was funded by the Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research. So that was partnered with the University of Sydney, Sekolah University in Indonesia, and then the University of the Philippines Resilient Institute in Diliman. So those were the three institutions that were working together.
Okay, nice. And then, ngayon, di ba, kanina nasabi mo, yung PhD opportunity dyan sa Netherlands,
Yes.
nakita mo siya sa, sa LinkedIn.
Yes.
Ano yung ginagawa mo ngayon sa university? I mean, ano ang research area mo ngayon dyan sa Netherlands?
The one I'm doing now, like the faculty. It's a bit odd. So I'm in the Faculty of Geoinformation Science and Earth Observation, so the ITC. I'm specifically in the Faculty of Applied Earth Sciences. So they're more geospatial analysis, but they do a lot of disaster resilience and disaster recovery work as well. So that's the whole field. So I work more in the humanitarian recovery now, humanitarian assistance. Here at the university. So it's a bit different to the civil engineering background that I came from, now to the geoinformation science, but there's still the links because it's more hazard related type of work.
May plano ka pa bang bumalik ng Pilipinas para gumawa ng research or doon maghanap ng permanent na trabaho to do research or
I do want to do some work in the Philippines. So at the moment, because I'm still in my first year of my PhD, like we're still planning the proposal and doing some trying to find out some case sites, and hopefully we're really pushing to do it in the Philippines. So we have a few contacts in the Philippines that we're reaching out to. So hopefully I'll be back in the next few months, years to do my PhD work. So that's exciting to continue that Philippines research.
Nice. So, ayun, hoping na matapos mo yung proposal and of course makuha yung funding to do it. Ayun. So since nag-usap na kami ni Isaac nung naging research niya, pag-usapan naman natin yung recent paper niya. So ang title nito ay The Cost of Flooding on Housing Under Climate Change in the Philippines, Examining Projected Damage at the Local Scale. Yes. So Isaac, can you explain muna yung paper mo in just one sentence?
One sentence. Okay. So I think the title says it well. we try to assess the impact of flood risk on households in the province of Leyte at the municipal scale. So we focused on one LGU, the municipal of Carigara, and we tried to use flood risk mapping to see how damage changes over time under climate change. That was one long sentence. But
Pero paano kayo nag-come up sa ganitong study? May specific ba na flooding event na nag-trigger to do this or anong backstory nito?
Not necessarily. It wasn't because of a specific hazard. So this project was actually funded again, like from before. So it was an existing project that we had well before I actually started this. It just got postponed because of COVID. So I jumped mid-project into this. So I think the kind of rationale behind this research was that we have a lot of climate knowledge and we're understanding that there's climate change information there. But now, how do we translate all of this technical understanding of climate change and what's happening around the world to more tangible use for the local level? So I think that was the gap that we were trying to close, is like translating climate into more practical and policy level implications. So that's why we went into the route of trying to quantify these damages for households.
Tapos, bakit Leyte? Ano nga bang municipality yun? Carigara? Tama ba?
Apa.
Bakit yun ang naging study site?
Yes. So actually, we already know that Leyte province is very prone to typhoons. So that area in itself, has a frequent flooding. So actually, the area of Carigara that we worked in was also a previous research site that my PI, who was my supervisor at the time, worked in before during his PhD. So it was also like a buildup of connections that we had there. But that was the main reason that we worked in that area. But also before that, we also went around Leyte as well. So we went to Tacloban, Abuyog, and Dulag in those areas to do more of some sampling for the work actually before this risk mapping.
Ayun, so since may background na tayo dun sa kung tungkol saan yung study, can you explain din ano yung methodology na ginawa nyo? Paano nyo minodel or quantify or project ano yung magiging flood damage sa future climate change scenario?
Yes. So since I'm trying to break it down because it's actually, looking back at it, there's actually a lot of moving parts to it. And there's a lot of data that we collected for this. So the paper that we're talking about today, that's actually was the second chapter of my master's thesis. So we actually had a paper before this that was to create fragility and vulnerability functions for the province of Leyte. So when we talk about disaster risk, we know that there's three main components that usually people talk about. So we have the hazard itself. So that's like floods, earthquakes, typhoons, storm surge. And then we have the exposure. So this is where like the type of assets that we're looking at. Are we looking at residential buildings, agricultural land, commercial buildings? So this is more building footprints. And then we also have the vulnerability, which is like the hard part because that can range from a lot of different factors. So you have the physical vulnerability, social vulnerability, economic vulnerability. But then again, we had to narrow this down for this research. And because I'm coming from an engineering lens, we focused more on the physical vulnerability of households. So I guess the first chapter of my thesis was to create a set of vulnerability functions for the province of Leyte. And that in itself took a lot of time because we had to collect household data and travel around to each house, ask them questions about previous flood events and do assessments to make these fragility and vulnerability functions. So just for people who don't know what the vulnerability functions, it's basically a graph and it tells you on the y-axis the percentage of damage of a house, so 0 to 100. And then on the x-axis, it tells you how deep the water is. So let's say if we had a 1 meter flood depth, we can estimate the damage for a specific house. And we did this for different types of material of houses. And that took how long? 2 months to go to 400 households and collect all this data. So that's why we went to the 3 municipalities to collect a range of household surveys. So that's just for the vulnerability data. So for the climate modeling, we actually worked with UPRI. So they're really good at modeling hazards and flood events. So I'm not a hydrologist or hydrologist. So they know more of the technical expertise on how they did it. There's also a paper on the process that I can share as well. But basically what they did was that they used the Philippines Climate Extreme Report from 2020 and then integrated the RCPs. So the RPCs are the representative concentration pathways. And they basically tell us, the future climate scenarios, projected scenarios. So we used RCP 8.5 and 4.5. So 8.5 is like the worst case scenario. What happens if we're doing really bad with greenhouse emissions? And then 4.5 is more the intermediate level. So we modeled different flood events, specifically rainfall flood events, not so much typhoon or storm surges, more in the rainfall. So we looked at 5, 25, 50-year, and 100-year flood events for the 2 RCPs. And then we also looked at different time intervals as well, so early, mid, late. So tying this all together, we had, how many maps? We had like 28 flood maps to see how it's changing over time. And that's like the part that we had for at least the hazard modeling. And then we also collected the cost data by interviewing a lot of carpenters and asking households how much did they spend to build their house. So then that's how we were able to get the cost data to quantify the damages. So there's a lot. So if you have any questions, just let me know.
yung binanggit mo kanina na yung RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5.
Yes.
Can you expound more dun sa future projections na anong ibig sabihin nung 4.5 and 8.5?
So the RCPs, they're basically the representative. So they're the representative concentration pathways, and they just tell us how much greenhouse gas concentration and radiative forces are in the atmosphere. So this is more the physical process of the Earth. But now there's also the SSPs, so the shared socio pathways, or shared socio-economic pathways. And this is more of the social side of human activity related, influence on climate change. So all these climate models that I'm talking about, the RCPs and SSPs, they're from the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they create these models, and then they give us an idea of the trajectories of the future. But yes, so they're pathways. So it's not something that we are following. Like it's like a probability. Like we might follow this, or we might follow this if we have this behavior, or if we continue doing this, then we're going to be on this behavior. On this pathway. So they're just more possible outcomes rather than fixed pathways.
Ayun. So kanina nasabi mo na nag-collect kayo to quantify yung risk. Kailangan ng hazard, exposure, and vulnerability.
Vulnerability, yes.
So, meron kang risk assessment for the present day. Paano mo siya na-incorporate dun sa RCP 4.5 and 8.5 para makita yung future na risk? And how do you argue na yung model mo is reliable or realistic?
No, that's true. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in modeling climate change is trying to validate that with what's happening on the ground. So what we did was we actually updated some of the elevation model in the area that we're working with, so we can have more accurate flood models. So what they did was that we have existing, I guess, what do you call it? Synoptic stations across the Philippines, and the EPRI team, they use these synoptic stations to see the rainfall patterns that are happening across the Philippines, and they can also downscale that to what's happening at the province level and also the municipal level. So if you look at the Philippines Climate Extreme Report, it actually gives you the expected, I guess, rainfall percentage that might happen in the next century under these climate scenarios. So I think this Climate Extreme Report was actually produced by Pagasa. So it's very comprehensive on how they did it. I'm not too sure on the exact methodology on how they came up to this downscaling process, but we applied these changes to the current situation in the municipality that we're working in. And then we also validated this with the community. So we also had community interviews as well, and we also had a workshop to say, okay, is this actually a realistic flood event that actually occurred? So we triangulated at least the baseline flood models to specific events. So I think we asked them about, typhoon. I can't remember the exact typhoon that we asked them, but then we also did a sensitivity analysis to see, okay, was what they were saying right to our models, and that's how you validate it. But then it's also climate change models, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, or we can only guess what's going to happen in the future. So all these climate models, there's always uncertainty, so we don't know what's going to happen exactly. Yes.
Siguro i-recap ko lang kung tama yung pagkaintindi ko nung method.
Yeah.
So for example, my year 2010, 2015, 2020, to quantify yung risk, dapat may hazard, exposure, and vulnerability ka for all those years. Tapos dapat may sa future scenario may ganun pa rin hazard, exposure and vulnerability. So yung hazard, exposure and vulnerability, kinolect nyo yung data na yon. And then para ma-incorporate yung future climate change scenario, saan siya nag-affect dun sa hazard, exposure and vulnerability?
So yeah, good question. So actually the climate change scenario mainly focuses more on the hazard. So we're looking at the change of rainfall, I guess across time. You're right that climate change and looking as well in the future contributes to risk because, there's urbanization, people are going to, build more houses. So we can't really anticipate that risk. At least that wasn't the scope of this research. We wanted to more focus on the effects of at least rainfall climate induced risk. So we incorporated that more on the rainfall for the risk mapping.
So bali yung sa future scenario, kung ano yung ginamit nyo na exposure and vulnerability sa present day, yun lang din ang ginamit sa future scenario, yung nag-iba yung hazard na value.
So we had an assumption that we kind of kept the building footprints the same and we kind of kept the vulnerability the same because it's very dynamic, and when you start to include all these changes, it starts to become a bigger project. And since it was only for my master's, it was like, okay, we need to limit some of the scope.
Tsaka ang dami ring magiging modeling na result kapag iniba-iba mo individual yung hazard, exposure and vulnerability.
And there's a lot of work that looks into
times.
each of them. No, I agree. So it's very, very complex in the factors that are influencing it.
Ayun. So dito, ano yung nakita nyo dun sa results nyo?
Yes. So actually, in our case site, we found that RCP 8.5, so the worst case scenario, that we found that flood risk from rainfall is decreasing over time. So we saw that actually the flood levels from the rainfall is receding. And that could be attributed to, rainfall also reducing, but then that could also mean that they're experiencing more drier weather there. So it's kind of challenging the idea that, okay, climate change is not increasing floods everywhere, but it's having a more, nuanced impact in this community. So it's having impacts unequally areas. So some areas might be getting drier, some areas might be getting more wetter. So it's challenging that narrative that floods are happening everywhere more frequently. So that's kind of the way that we also position this paper.
Parang contradictory siya sa typical na naiisip natin na in the future dapat lalala yung bagyo, lalala yung baha, and therefore dapat more damage. Pero dito nakita nyo na bababa yung damage in the future. How
from rainfall? From rainfall, actually, because there's also different other factors. So like typhoons would be a separate, because there's also wind and storm surges from that. So that also could be a different aspect into how climate change is affecting that as well. But specifically on the rainfall level, its variations on impact is very different across the Philippines. We're starting to see that it's starting to become more wetter in the north, and then towards the south, it's becoming more drier. And that's what we're seeing in terms of at least that.
Pero di ba for rainfall lang ito na may decrease in damage. What if i-take into account mo din yung other hazards? Ayun nga, yung sinabi mo na yung sa typhoon, yung wind damage, ganun. May ginawa nyo ba yan or hindi pa?
No, we didn't include that in the study, but it's actually everything's interconnected, because, if there's a decrease in floods, that means there's going to be more drier soil, and we don't know what that actually means in the long run. So I think the rainfall that we looked at was 24-hour rainfall. So that's rainfall over, the 24-hour period. So if it's becoming more drier, that means, the soil will be more dry. So if there's intense rainfall for a short period of time, there actually could be flash floods, because, the ground is more dry and it doesn't have time to absorb the water. So there's a lot of implications and other factors that still could be explored in this line of work, especially when looking at risk mapping. And there's a lot of work that's actually being done, like looking at multi-hazard assessments. So there's a lot of work being done in this current field to look into that type of things.
Kanina may emphasis ka dun sa local scale na risk assessment. So can you expound din dun sa importance ng local scale and yung global scale na models? Ano ba ang advantage kapag global scale lang, global model yung ginamit mo at yung incorporating din yung itong mga local scale na assessments?
The local scales. Yes. I think more on the local scale, it's because, the way that at least the National Disaster Risk Framework happens in the Philippines is that each LGU, it's decentralized, meaning that they all respond to disasters differently, and they all have their ways of, planning their disaster risk management strategies. So at a local level, that's the cons is that each LGU now, because of that, has different capacities to carry out their work. So, for example, a first-class municipality compared to a fifth-class municipality, they're going to respond differently, regardless even if they have the same hazard. So that's one of the cons about, this whole decentralization of this. But then, what we're trying to do is we're trying to support these type of communities to help them understand more of these climate risk informed strategies. So what we did was we had a few workshops to translate some of the climate information to these LGUs. So I think at the start I said one of the big gaps that we had was translating, climate knowledge to the policy and local level. So one of the ways that we did this was through this risk mapping. Like we were able to visually show, okay, these communities are going to experience flood risk, and in the next 100 years, these communities might not experience flood risk. So that's one of the benefits, I guess, working at the local level is because you're able to communicate that idea. Because we actually also interviewed households, and just to see where is their climate understanding at. And a lot of people, they know that climate change is happening, especially the farmers, but they're unable to see the more quantified damage it might have on their household in the future. So they're very aware that climate change is happening, but then just translating it more at the policy and the government level, it's a bit hard, especially when trying to make policies about this. So yes, that's I would say on that, if that makes sense.
Gusto ko pala balikan yung results na sinabi mo kanina kasi sabi mo sa future na climate change scenario yung RCP 4.5 and 8.5 may decrease dun sa sa cost ng damage. How much yung decrease na yun at paano siya kina-quantify? Parang 3% ba yung yung sinabi mo dun sa paper and
3% for RCP 4.5, so that's what we're tracking at the moment. And then if you're looking at 8.5, which we're not really tracking at the moment, I think it was like a 34% decrease in flood risk, at least for the 100-year flood event. So if we continue on the path, there's going to be a 34% decrease in flood risk, at least for that area, right? And for that type of hazard, we don't know what that might look like for other hazards. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on climate change, but there's implications there it might have. Yes.
Ay nabanggit mo pala yung hindi ko pala natanong kanina kasi familiar ako sa idea. Pero sa audience na hindi familiar, anong ibig sabihin nung 100-year flood? Can you explain?
Yes, so sometimes it's confusing. So when people say a 100-year flood event, it's going to happen once every 100 years, which is not true. It's basically a probability. So 1 in 100 means that there's that scale flood event or rainfall event or whatever event you're talking about has a 1% chance of happening within a given year. So I think that's the best way to foresee. So if you see two 100-year events happen, people are like, oh wait, it's not going to happen. But then there's still that 1% probability of it happening every year. So that's why.
Ayun. Para nabanggit ko din to sa sa previous episode namin na pwedeng mangyari yung 100-year flood on consecutive years pero yung probability sobrang baba sobrang baba na parang pwede mo siyang well, hindi siguro completely accurate tong statement na to, pero parang nanalo ka sa loto pero pero malas. So yun yung comparison.
Yes, no, I agree.
So may possibility pero hindi siya zero. Sobrang baba lang ng ng chance.
Yeah. And there's also talks like 1 in 20-year events are now becoming 1 in 17-year events, and these I guess 1 in 100-year events are becoming more and more frequent. So climate change is also affecting that.
Parang ano nga bang tawag doon? Recurrence interval, parang bumababa yung recurrence interval niya.
Yes, and they also call it annual exceedance probability. So that's the percentage side of it as well.
Ayun. So siguro recap ko lang yung yung napag-usapan namin dito sa study. So tiningnan nila Isaac yung risk sa future na climate change scenario, and para magawa yon kailangan nila mag-collect ng hazard, exposure, and vulnerability data para ma-model din yung yung future na risk gamit ang RCP 4.5 and 8.5 na scenarios na ginawa ng IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Tapos dito nakita nila na for rainfall bababa yung cost ng damage by 3 to 34%. Pero hindi ibig sabihin nun ay baliwalain na natin yung epekto ng climate change. Kasi for rainfall lang yun, hindi pa na-account yung ibang hazard. So kung
hazards or even urbanization as well.
Oo. Kasi constant lang pala yung yung exposure and vulnerability.
Yes.
So ayun. So kung i-account nyo pa yung other variables, pwedeng mag-iba pa yung pa yung result.
Yes. So I guess in a way it's also showing that, the impacts of climate modeling, it's very dynamic. So there's a lot of moving parts, so we can't just say, climate change is affecting this. There's actually a lot more moving parts. And we have to be careful in how we attribute some damages to climate change as well.
Ayun. So, for anyone interested dun sa study and i-analyze din siya in more detail, so check nyo na lang ang link sa description.
Yes.
Ngayon, siguro puntahan naman natin yung more on behind the scenes nung study.
Yes.
So, for this study, paano yung naging funding situation nito? Magkano yung funding and saan siya ginagamit?
Yes, I think I don't know. It was a bit easier for me just because I jumped onto the existing project, so it was well funded already. So as a master student, I was just enjoying, I guess, that end, and I was just doing the work and objectives. So I don't know if I could really comment on that point, but funding is actually very hard because, I'm actually trying to do that for my PhD as well. So we're trying to contact a lot of people and create funding. So it's a difficult question on my end, Paul.
Pero, di ba, so for this study, di ba, kailangan yung puntahan yung 400, tama ba? 400 na
400
bahay
households,
yung pinuntahan nyo. So, ilang araw mo ginawa yung mga interviews na yun? And
took so long. So my Tagalog is not that, fluent. And in, at least where I work in Tacloban, they don't speak Tagalog. So even if I tried to understand, it was very hard for me. So they speak Waray. So I had to have someone to help me. So I had a research assistant. So collecting the 400 data, there was 2 of us. So that took us, I think, 2 months to 1.5 months to do, to go to 400 households. So we did 90 households in 3 municipalities, and then 120 or just over 100 in Tacloban City. And we would do it from Monday to Friday. We would probably aim for at least 20 houses per day. Obviously working with the barangay captain, the MDRMO, to find, these households that were damaged. So it was a very long process, and some of the funny things that happened is I think to one of the municipalities that we worked in, I think it was just bad timing on our end. They had their fiesta. the week
Ah,
the week happening. So it was very hard to get interviews because no one's home. They're always at the publication trying to prepare.
ah.
So it was a bit of a mishap. So timing and schedule was a bit hard there.
Dalawa lang kayo for all the
Yeah,
interviews. Ah, okay.
yeah. So each survey interview probably took, I think, 20 to 15 minutes at the start, and then because we became familiar with the questions, like, oh, okay, and we became more efficient. We narrowed it down to a more faster level towards the end of the surveys.
Ano pala yung mga ano yung mga tinatanong nyo sa mga survey to collect itong mga hazard exposure and vulnerability data? Pwede mo ba yan i-share or confidential yan?
Do I have a draft of it? So for that survey, we mostly focus on the vulnerability. So that's the paper that I had beforehand. So we're looking at the damage state of the households. I think it should be in the paper that I have previously because it's basically just ranking the different states of damage for households. So it should be in the previous paper. But the actual like individual results, I don't think I can share because of like the ethical reasons of like specific households. But I could share my survey if anyone was interested, like the empty survey. Yeah.
Ayun, so may work experience ka na sa Australia, Philippines, tapos ngayon syempre sa Netherlands. May napapansin ka ba na differences kung paano nila ina-approach yung research studies at paano ito nakatulong sa mindset mo ngayon as a researcher?
Yes, I think that's such a big topic. I could probably go on this for a long time, but I would try to keep it short. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Because at least coming from, a Western country, like Australia or the Netherlands, when working in more developing countries, we have to be a bit more sensitive to how we approach, I guess, research. There's something, I guess. Wait, is this the question that you're asking? Like the way that we do food work in the Philippines, like coming from, these type of areas. So there's always an emphasis on trying to decolonize the way that we do work so that we're not coming into communities, collecting the data and then leaving. And then people are like, oh, what's happening to the data? Like, are you going to share it with us? So we have to be a bit more ethical in how we approach this. So like, trying to include participants in the way that we design the research, trying to include those voices. So that's always in the back of the mind, even though I'm a Filipino, at least by blood, it's something that I'm always cautious about because I'm not really familiar, or I didn't grow up in the Philippines, so I don't know 100% of the struggles and the experiences of living in the Philippines. So obviously coming from Australia, all of that identity crises and challenges came when working in the Philippines. So I know the question later on is like, what are the challenges? So that's definitely one of the challenges that I experienced when working and doing that in the Philippines. Because it's different mindsets and approaches, right? And yeah.
Ayun, nabanggit mo yung identity crisis kasi Filipino, Filipino Australian ganun. Can you detail din itong experience mo na itong challenge?
It's gonna be like a trauma dumping.
Sige lang.
Trauma dumping session. No, like I just think sometimes, when I was going to the Philippines, at least interviewing households, people would prioritize at least speaking to you because like, oh, wow, you're from a different country. So they're very open. It gets old really fast. Like at first my naive self was like, oh, okay, this is cool, getting attention. But then you start to realize, oh, okay, this is not like, like it starts to feel uncomfortable. But then it's just like a mindset of just like trying to learn about the community and learning about the culture. I think that's one of the reasons why I continue to work in the Philippines as well, because I'm also continuously learning from the people there. I'm trying to learn Tagalog, so I have a Filipino community here and they're also speaking to me Tagalog, so we're bouncing back and forth. So you just have to be very self-aware when working in these type of communities. So there was some identity crisis. I was like, why am I doing this work? There's other people in the Philippines that could potentially do equally or even a better job at what I'm doing with this work. But I'm also trying to frame it like I'm also using this opportunity to learn about my culture as well. So that's where the identity crisis kicked in. Of like, should I be doing this? But then also like, I want to learn. But in essence, like, I love working in the Philippines. Everyone there is just so welcoming. And they adopted me into like their little family, so it was great.
Taga saan pala yung parents mo dito sa Pilipinas?
So my mom's from Pangasinan, and then my dad is from Zambales. So they're from so Ilocano. They're from they speak Ilocano.
Ayun. Natutunan mo ba yung Bisaya yung Leyte, di ba? Tama ba? Or iba yung language nila?
Half of it. So I think
natutunan mo ba yan or hindi?
They try to speak to me. No, they speak Waray. At least where I was working at, they speak Waray, and then the other side they speak Bisaya. They tried to teach me. They tried to teach me Waray when I was in the office.
Baka puro mura yan na Waray na mura.
It was so hard, but like I understood some words. But they were just so nice, and they helped me with that. But now if you speak to me in Waray, I'm just like, oh, I don't know.
Pero may na pick up ka naman na mga phrases.
Some words.
Nice.
Yeah, it was funny because when I worked with the UPRI team, they also came down to help me with some of the field work as well. They were there for like a week or two, and then we had a rule like 9 to 5, like we'll speak to you in English, but then after 5 p.m. we'll speak to you in Tagalog. I was like, okay, fair enough. So that was part of my learning process when working with them.
Nice. So dito sa research mo, at what point did you realize na pwede na siyang ipasa for publication?
When did I know that was ready for publication? I think it's a bit more easier when you're studying, right? Because you have already like academic timelines of when you need to, submit and publish. So we had conferences of like, I want to submit this by this conference, so I should have this section done. And then obviously towards the thesis, like you progressively get done. You can work on your paper for as long as you want. You just have to get over the fact that it's never going to be perfect when you submit it for review. You're always going to get that reviewer or two who's going to critique your work. So, and you're also always going to get feedback. So I think you should be able to know once you're confident and be able to, defend your work or talk about specific points. But, there's always going to be uncertainty. And it's always going to be like, oh, I could have done this better. Reflecting back on my work now, I always see like, oh, I could have done this better. So it's more of like, it's not going to be perfect when you submit it. So I guess in that sense.
Gano katagal ginawa yung paper na to? So kanina sabi mo around 2 months yung pag-collect ng data, pag-interview. And then gano katagal yung analysis, gano katagal yung pagsusulat ng paper, gano katagal yung review process?
Yeah. So I started my master's in July 2022. And actually, my supervisor threw me in the deep end because we started field work July 7, so a week after I started. But I did some small work beforehand. But so the data collection went from July to September, towards the end of September. And then that was that period of collecting data. Then I was writing up that paper until the following July. So it almost took me, how many months is that? 7, 8 months to type that paper up. And then we just submitted that paper because we were like, okay, we just need to get it out. So that was done for chapter 1. And then chapter 2, we worked at least from after that. So from July to the following year to work on that paper. But the review process took too long.
Ilang months?
I think for the first paper, it took almost a year. The fragility functions, and it was mostly because it was hard to find reviewers. So the review process takes so long, and I only went through 2 rounds of revisions, and the second one was very minor. So don't underestimate the review process if anyone's doing research, because it does take long. But the second paper actually only took, I think, less than 6 months from publishing to acceptance. So that was a bit more optimistic on that end.
Hindi mo naman na-experience yung ma-reject tapos pinasa na lang sa ibang journal?
Actually, yes. So like, it's very common to get desk rejects, and that's fine because like, journals just say, okay, it doesn't fit the scope of our work, so let's just push it out. So I don't really mind that one, but then, it's more tiring when it's like, you go through so many revisions and then they reject it towards the end. I feel like that's a bit more hurtful.
Mas okay pa yung reject agad, no, kaysa papa-revise ka pa tapos reject. Masakit.
Yes, no, that's true. But it's very much character building. I feel like you build a lot of resilience when going through the publishing process. But that's for everyone.
Ayun, so ano ang mga ma-advise mo sa mga aspiring researchers?
Tough question. So for anyone who wants to do research, I think there's a few things to keep in mind, right? So especially if you're considering to do like, a master's of research or PhD, I feel like, first of all, trying to find a good supervisor to guide you. I feel like a lot of people are really stuck on like, oh, I want to work at this institution on this project. But at the end of the day, you're going to be working with a supervisor for 3 to 4 years or even longer. So finding someone who you can work with, I think, is something that's really important for someone to conduct research. What else? Being very flexible in your research direction as well. So, like I said, I went from very technical engineering. Now I'm doing more social sciencey work and understanding livelihoods. So it's a big 180 flip. So being very open to those changes in your research direction and being open to learn new skills, I also feel like is very important for future researchers. And I think the last one is, I feel like the misconception of doing research, right, is like, oh, you have to be very smart, you have to be very technical driven. But I'm also like on the side, like, you come into research to learn those skills, but there's also soft skills that are actually more important. So being able to communicate with other people, being able to socialize and network, I feel like those are equally or even more important during a PhD, because I think that's what makes or breaks some of the key qualities. In PhD, you get taught a lot to present your work to different audiences, because like, for example, like, you're working on your PhD and you're very technical driven, but then sometimes you get asked to like present to like a very general audience who knows nothing. So having those skills to talk to different people and present like that is something also worth working on when doing pursuing a degree in research. But yeah.
Siguro dagdag ko lang yung sinabi mo sa paghanap ng advisor.
Yeah.
I think in a way mahirap din siya sa sa mga students, kasi for example, ikaw kukuha ka ng graduate degree sa ibang university, wala ka namang kahit anong idea dun sa dun sa magiging advisor mo. So in a way malaking gamble din talaga siya for you.
It's hard. I agree it's hard, but then you can also, reach out to their students to see like, oh, how are they going, like, and stuff like that. And you can kind of get the vibes, because like you also do interview processes with them. And I agree, like you also learn that during the PhD process, you have to work with them. So like for my supervisor for my master's, I worked with him for 3 years, so we were able to build that relationship. So it's also a work in progress. So trying to maintain that over a long period of time is also important during the PhD.
Ayun, and then last question, do you have anything to promote?
Trying to promote. So at the moment, I think this will be a good point to point out. Like, I'm also doing research in the Philippines. So hopefully looking more on humanitarian response and recovery. So looking at more self-recovery pathways. So looking at ways people rebuild houses, without assistance. So if anyone's interested or want to collaborate more on this side of the research, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be very interested to talk. What else is there to plug? Anyone
social media?
Social media platforms. If anyone wants to do, a master's of humanitarian engineering or wants to learn more about it, feel free to reach out to me as well. I know it's very, it's very vague and sometimes people don't know where to start, but I'm happy to chat and talk to people.
Ayun. So I guess hanggang dito na lang muna tayo. Maraming salamat kay Isaac sa pagpapa-unlock ng aming imbitasyon.
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you.
At maraming salamat din sa lahat ng nakinig at nanood. See you everyone next week. Madami pa tayong pag-uusapan na research na ginagawa ng ating mga Pinoy scientists.